James Fitzgibbons Museum, Southeast Chicago Historical Society. And here is Cynthia Ogorek. So tell us about how you managed to get so many great books written about this area.
Well, because the first book was along the Calumet River, and I was at a conference at the South Suburban Genealogical and Historical Society in 2003, and the editor from Arcadia Publishing was their acquisitions editor. And she came over and she said, "Do you think you'd want to do a book?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it." Well, in the time it took her to walk back across the conference room to get her packet and come back, I noticed at the table next to me that there was at least one, maybe two books on the Chicago River. And I said to myself, it's time we had something about the Calumet. And so I said, yes, I will put a proposal together, and I did that over Thanksgiving weekend, and by Christmas Eve I had a contract. And since then, we've just been rolling along.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to read the very last thing in that book. Very end. It's a quote from someone named, is it William Briggs?
William Briggs.
Yeah.
About the Calumet River, William A. Briggs in 1935 wrote, "It is doubtful if another stream with such a history can be found on the surface of the globe."
Wow.
So we're pretty important down here. Although probably the majority of people don't even realize there's a river here, let alone three of them.
Right. Wow. Okay, so was that your first then?
That was the first full book, yeah. I've been writing for years and years and years, but this was the first book.
Okay, what kind of work preceded this?
Well, just before this, I had been the executive director of a local history museum in the south suburbs, and I had edited a very small, like a pamphlet type book on railroads for that town with another gentleman in the south suburbs, and had been doing papers for the South Suburban Heritage Association conferences, and Illinois State Historical Society conference, and when anything I could write, I was doing that because my goal was to be in historical publishing.
Okay, and what came next?
Let's see. The next one was the Lincoln Highway around Chicago, which people don't really realize that the Lincoln Highway in our area. Oh, hold it up. Okay. All right. This section of the road between Dyer, Indiana, and Geneva, Illinois, ran around through the suburbs: Chicago Heights, Mokina, Joliet, Aurora, and it was probably the first beltway in the nation. And this was around 1913, just generally speaking. So it's party time here at the old museum.
Well, I think that's in response to how terrific your statement was.
Oh. Eavesdroppers.
Deck the halls.
Deck the halls. Hang the books.
Wow.
So anyway, this road, actually, the purpose of it was to bypass Chicago. Because at that point in time, to get through Chicago on the surface streets, you were crossing something like 22 railroads.
Yeah.
And plus all the traffic downtown and whatever. So this gave people a chance who were going cross country to avoid all of that traffic. However, they did have feeder routes that went into Chicago. Roosevelt Road was one of them. The Dixie Highway was another. So if you really needed to get into downtown Chicago for some reason, you could off of this road. But that's why it's important to the Calumet region in general, if not Chicago per se.
Does it help to explain why some of those sort of small town names are now fairly vibrant because there were routes in already?
Well, most of this route is a Sauk Trail. So those towns were little settlements historically, and then as the 20th century progressed, roads like the Dixie Highway and the Lincoln Highway actually, help grow those towns.
Yeah.
Although places like Aurora and Joliet had water transportation, they were on the canals and so forth, so they were doing well. But this certainly didn't help, and it was very viable into the 1950s, because once the interstate, I-80, was built, this just became like a route for salesmen who were going from town to town, and a lot of people stayed in motels on the Lincoln Highway while they were waiting for their new suburban houses to be built. A lot of people stayed in these same motels while they were waiting for their divorces to be finalized. So we have a lot of history.
Multi-purpose.
Multi-purpose, yes. Exactly.
Wow. Okay, and that was published?
This one, I think, came out in 2008. Yes,
Okay.
2008. 2004 was the first one, 8. And then the next one was the South Shore Railroad, and that was 2012. Somehow I've gotten into this rut of every 4 years, whether the world needs another local history or not. We publish one.
Okay, so tell us about this. How did you get started on this one?
Well, I have, I call her my business guru, and she said, you always have to have something to sell at the back of the room after you do programs, historical programs. So I had already been doing tours on the South Shore line, and I thought, well, I guess a book would be in order. So I traveled to all the appropriate institutions and archives from downtown Chicago out to South Bend to collect photographs, and then put the whole thing together and structured it so that the front half is a history of the business of the South Shore Railroad. The back half is a tour guide. So you carry this little guy on the train with you, and when you're looking out the window, you know what you were looking at.
That's fantastic. Built in.
It is. It's built in, and one of the highlights of this trip on the route is that the South Shore runs on the same route as Lincoln's funeral train. From 12th Street out to about 124th, it ran on the Michigan Central Railroad, but that's the same alignment as the IC and later on the South Shore. So there's more than you want to know about it right here, but there's a lot of history in the corridor.
Wow, that's fantastic. And do you do actual tours with this?
I can. If people contact me, I'm available to do tours. We can make arrangements.
Yeah. Sounds great. Okay, and then?
Well, the last one came out in August, and that is the Chicago and Western Indiana. This came out in 2016. This railroad is one of the railroads that really made the industrial development of the southeast side of Chicago possible. It wasn't solely, instrumental in it, but it offered a connection to the railroads that were coming through Indiana. The C&WI ran up to the Indiana state line, and there was a huge interlocking tower there on the state line. It was the biggest in the country when it was built in the 1890s.
And where would we have found that on the state line?
If you know where Goslin is, and those IHB railroad tracks, they're right on the state line. It was south of there.
Okay.
It's gone now. The building is gone, but that's what made it possible for the Wabash, the Erie, and the Monon to come in and run through Hegewisch, up along Torrance Avenue, east side of Torrance Avenue, past the Ford plant, Wisconsin Steel, and up to South 81st Street in South Chicago. And then it got on the Dalton line and went to Dearborn Station. This railroad had 5 owners, and those 3 railroads were 3 of them, and then the Grand Trunk joined it around 45th Street, and the C&EI, which is the Chicago and Eastern Illinois, picked it up at Dalton and ran straight downtown to Dearborn Station. So here in the southeast side, this was important because it was the Belt Railway of Chicago was one of its, I think you might call it subsidiary lines. There were contracts and all sorts of legal manipulations, but the C&WI would bring these trains in to a certain point, then they would transfer freight cars to the BRC, and the BRC would deliver to the steel mills and the whatever other mills around here that were getting raw materials, and then they would pick things up and move them out to the East Coast along the CMWI. This came along in 1879, and because of it, we had a lot more industrial development down here than we might have had otherwise.
Wow. Wow. And
Includes the railroad portion.
and your next venture is?
I'm currently working on research for the town, or what was the town of Hegewisch, which is, I call it Chicago's last company town. It was founded by the only, by a non-steel mill. South Chicago, East Side, and South Deering all call themselves mill gates because they were at the gates of these steel mills, whereas Hegewisch was founded by a rolling stock company. And they built freight cars of all sorts and dimensions. And today, if you're on Brainerd Avenue and maybe you take a quick park over at the South Shore Station, get up on the platform, look across those tracks, number one, you will be looking over the original Chicago and Western Indiana right-of-way, and then beyond that was the Nickel Plate Road, and then beyond that was United States Rolling Stock Company. And that's where they set up shop, and some of their investors purchased all the land on the other side of Brainerd Avenue, which is what we call Hegewisch today. They needed a place for their workers to live. Okay. So they sold the land, they helped them build houses and so forth.
And so this is one of your sources?
Yeah, the Hegewisch News.
Sorry, and a new school is assured here?
This was in 1962, and another battle. They were trying to convince the Board of Education that Hegewisch needed another elementary school. If your viewers realize that this was part of the baby boom era, and they were saying that there would be like 1,680 more children available for elementary education in 1963. St. Columba and St. Florian were already at capacity with 600 and some apiece, and Henry Clay, which was the public school, had something like 950, and they had space for only 100 more. And almost 2,000 children were going to hit in 1963, and yet they had to convince the Board of Education that this was an issue. But I think it's this issue said that yes, they were on the list.
Assured. Okay, so that became Grissom, right?
Yes.
Was it Grissom?
Okay.
Up at
Avalon
Trails. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so what does the future look like beyond Hegewisch?
For me?
Yeah.
I'm stuck on this now. I have no idea. I've been at this for about 7 years already, and I need to wrap it up one of these days and actually start writing and get it published.
And this one, okay, but we can't thank you enough for all that you have done. Because, as I said, I had a question about the Calumet River this morning. Your book was at home. I opened it up. There were the answers.
Very good. I did my job. That's good.
And, especially for the Calumet River these days, because this area does not celebrate its maritime history, and doing so is
I have to admit, I'm among those who really didn't realize there was a river. I live in Calumet City, and it never dawned on me that the northern border of Calumet City is the Grand Calumet, the southern border is the Little Calumet. They didn't teach this at school. And then, the more I found out about it, I realized actually I live on an island, if you want to think about it, because the river cuts you off at all ends. All we were aware of as children probably were the railroads, and that's another thing about Hegewisch, which makes it rather unique. It's that it's an island. It's surrounded by water and railroads.
Right.
So it's very different. Well, and the other thing is Hegewisch is at the junction of the Calumet, the Little Calumet, and the Grand Calumet. In fact, that's why the United States Rolling Stock Company picked that property, because at that time they were on the cusp, just the end of the water transportation, water power era, and the railroad era was starting. So they needed that water frontage, and this was an ideal location. Well, what is it like?
And is there a marker?
No, there's.
If there were a marker, then what should it say right at that point?
Well, you would talk about the location of the U.S. Rolling Stock Company, and probably point out that this was 1884. We're just ending that water era. We're getting into electrical, and steam is almost finished. We're going to be into diesel engines. Railroads are going to take over, and then trucking came in. So water is losing its value as a economic engine, shall we say.
Right.
But 60 years later, they were widening the Calsac Channel, and I won't go into that unless you've got years to listen to this. But that all happened at Hegewisch, and that O'Brien Lock is at Hegewisch, and that connected the St. Lawrence Seaway with the Mississippi Waterway, or the Gulf Waterway, and that's right there at Hegewisch.
Wow.
So it's just unfortunate that it's not something everybody sees every day, and they don't teach it in school.
Right, right.
So we're not aware of how important this area is.
Well, Cynthia, you, through this, have relayed the message.
Okay.
And again, thank you so much for the work that you've done, because, these should be the textbooks for the area, so that people understand that.
Thank you for the appreciation.
Yeah, thank you.